Hello and welcome to a special episode of Surfing Your Edge. I'm Kristine Goad, your Surfing Your Edge coach, and I am here today with my guest, Tosh Patterson. You may remember Tosh from a previous episode. We met last month and had so much to talk about. We decided to come back and do another episode. And today we're talking and thinking we may actually do a third episode next month. So welcome again, Tosh. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And for anyone who doesn't remember, Tosh is a life coach and a retreat leader who works with smart, motivated, professional women who, despite their impressive career success, are feeling stressed out, burned out, and uninspired. Her clients are yearning to slow down, work less, and reduce stress, and Tosh is fiercely committed to helping them learn how to simplify and enjoy life's pleasures without feeling guilty. So she's doing really important work in the world, and work I think most of us would benefit from. And today she's here to talk about radical self-care. And we're going to talk about the reason this fits in with Surfing Your Edge is because we're going to be looking at some of those scary topics, what might feel scary because they're legal and they're big and they're talking about things that we may not want to look at. So we're going to be surfing our edge a little bit and looking at some topics that some of us may not have looked at before and may have been putting off, but really shouldn't, especially now that we're in the times of COVID. So, Tosh, do you want to give a little introduction to what you're going to be speaking about today in terms of radical self-care?
Yes. So, I encounter people who think that self-care is really just about manicures and pedicures and massages. And while that's certainly an aspect of self-care, self-care is so much more layered than that. And so today we're going to be talking about being prepared for emergencies as a fundamental aspect of self-care. And so personal emergency preparedness is something that so many people overlook for the reason you stated already, which is it's not sexy, it's not fun, it sounds so boring. Let me run away from it and hide under the covers, leave me alone.
Right.
But it really is important, especially in the context that we're living in right now. And I have a master's degree in counseling and then a background in crisis management. So for 20 years, people would call me at all hours of the day and night to deal with extremely difficult emergency situations, from suicides to pipe bursts to electricity out for a small college campus, which was like its own town. And so after 20 years, I have learned a lot about the importance of being as prepared as you can for your own personal emergencies. And the lesson that I've learned is that you really need to have important documents and foundational materials in place for your life, because it just helps give you some peace of mind.
Right.
The other thing is, I also learned the importance of important documents and emergency preparedness, because for 2 years I was an accountability coach in a big name money program. And, when we're not organized and things are cluttered and there's no clarity, it creates stress and anxiety and overwhelm, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do around self-care, right? So what can you do on the front end to be preventative, to make sure that things are clear, that things are organized, that you have an understanding of what's in place for yourself? And so I think that from my perspective, it's important for us to use this quarantine time to get organized, to take care of the basics so that we can create more peace of mind, knowing that things are handled. And not to be morbid or anything, but the unfortunate reality is that, COVID itself is an experience that has extreme consequences, where someone can live their life or be seriously limited with their health. And so why play Russian roulette with that, right? Like, just take care of it and know that it's done. And it's a part of adulting. Let's adult. Let's make it a priority.
And this actually came about for you. It hit you home. It hit you personally during another another health crisis that we had not too long ago. And can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so back in 2019, I was working at a university, a Big Ten university, and I was a part of a task force that was actually looking at what would happen to the university if H1N1 would flare up and cause the state of Maryland or our surrounding area to declare a state of emergency, and we had to dismiss all students. And so we were spending so much time talking about how would we manage students, what would it look like, you know, how quickly could we get faculty and staff and students off campus and evacuation, like all these things. And so it really caused me to think for myself, like, what does this mean for me? Because at the time, I had newly moved to the state of Maryland where I was living. I didn't have any family in the area. I didn't have any close friends yet because I was still new to the area. And so I was like, man, how do I know that my important things are taken care of? And how can I grab and go if something happens? And so it started, this what I'm about to teach and share with your audience today started all the way back in 2008, 2009, and has, you know, morphed over time to what I'm teaching today. And so I have, you know, and I'll go into details about this, but I have a binder for myself, the orange one, and a binder for my husband, the black one, and it has important stuff in there, which we'll review. But that's where it grew out of. And I just needed to know that if an emergency happened that was exterior to me, like a state of emergency declared, or an emergency in my own life that I needed to be able to grab and go and take care of, that's how this was created.
So basically right now with COVID, whenever I hear something new on the news and I decide that I need my husband to know, if I need to go and if I go into the hospital, I need you to know this, you know. So I've started a list and it's on my refrigerator of, you know, if I go into the hospital, and then there are little bullet points that I'm writing down and adding. So are you trying to tell me that that's not good enough?
You should put that in from the fridge and put it in the binder, and then you'll have one comprehensive place. That's a good start, though. You're doing good. You're doing good.
Great. So do you want to tell us what you have a 3-step process you're going to share with us today? So can you
Yes.
share with us what the first step is in taking
Yes.
care of ourselves in this way?
Yes. So the first step is to identify, you know, do you have a will and a power of attorney? And so I know that that seems scary to some people because it seems like I don't understand what's the difference between a will and a power of attorney, or I don't have any money, I don't have anything to leave to anybody, I don't need those things. But that's not true. You actually do need these things to be in place, regardless of how much or how little money that you have available to you. And so, you know, what's the difference between the will and the power of attorney? That's the question that people ask all the time. So you may have heard of a power of attorney. It's also referred to as a POA. And basically, it's a written document that allows somebody to make decisions on your behalf. And so the most common uses for a POA is that you would name someone legally to make decisions for you financially, for your health, in the event that you couldn't make them for yourself. So you do want to name someone to be your power of attorney who you really trust, who you believe would have your best interest at heart. And this may change over time, or it could be for specific situations. So for example, about 12 years ago, I was going to be abroad for 6 months and I wasn't married yet. And I didn't have family who was going to be with me abroad. So I had named a friend of mine who we were very, very close. And I asked her if she would be my power of attorney for like a 6-month window. And she had access to my finances and we had things set up, and it was very clear on the ways that she could act for me from the state of Maryland, which would be different than what my family, you know, my mother and father would be able to do for me. But, you know, we had a clear understanding. And so she was my power of attorney for a specific amount of time. Now, you can have a power of attorney that's named, indefinitely, just if something happens for you, that person will act on your behalf. But that's the power of attorney aspect of it. And the power of attorney, basically, if you name someone specific that's from today forward, that person could act on your behalf during your lifetime. Whereas a will is specifically for upon your death, this is how your estate, your money, your house, whatever, should be shared with different people, or what should happen to it. So I tend to think of the POA as more of like, this is your living will slash support if you're incapacitated in some way, versus a will is the definite, end of the line, specific bullet points of what you want to have executed when you're no longer here in the world. So I would encourage people to think about having these items in place. Number one, especially if you have kids. If you have children who are young and something happens to you, you want to know that the guardianship would go to X person. These are not the things that you want to leave just out unhandled, and also I would encourage people to think about, if you have parents or other people that you love who are still here, do they have these documents? Can you act on their behalf if something happens? And as parents age or people get sick, you want to be able to support them. And if you haven't done this very basic fundamental thing that I really do believe is a part of self-care, then you're going to be frustrated in the moment when you can't do the things that you need to do to be able to love and support the people closest to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just stop there and see if anything resonated with you, or if you want to emphasize any point that I just made.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First of all, you don't, I'm assuming that when you make these decisions, you want to share those decisions with the people near you, and make sure that they're aware of what your wishes are and that you have these documents. So my next question is, say I have decided, I have this person that I want me to be my power of attorney. How do I say I've been hit by a car, how do I let medical professionals who might be taking care of me if I am not conscious, how do I let them know how to reach my person with power of attorney?
Oh, that's a good question. I would assume that, so let me be upfront and say, I don't know the full answer to your question because I have not dealt with that.
Okay.
But typically, if you are incapacitated in some way, the hospital staff would look through whatever they had access to, your phone, your identification, and pull up information about you. So like the state police may go to your house and knock on the door, and whoever answers would then they would relay the information. Those are the things that have happened when I've been in emergency situations, where police have been looking through their database. They find out more about you. They go to the home in person and they say, we need to convey this information about this person. And then the family acts from that point on. So, so that's one scenario. I think that if it's the hospital calling, or if it's the police or somebody who may have been with you when an emergency happened, they would do their best to be in contact with your family. And then hopefully, like you said earlier, the person who's been designated for this role would know, oh, something happened to Kristine, I got to do X, Y, and Z. And we're going to talk about in step 3 about your binder location, how to communicate that to someone. But that's my initial thoughts around, if something happened and it wasn't clear how to identify you. Those could be scenarios that could happen.
I know that in my smartphone, there are places where I can designate an emergency contact and things like that. So I'm wondering if there's a way that I could leave notes in there for, how to find my the person who is my power of attorney, and also maybe even where to find this binder that you're going to tell me about.
That's a great suggestion, especially as we're more digital nowadays. There may be options in our smartphone that I'm not even aware of because I'm so used to this method. So that's something to consider as well. Like I know some people put in their phones like SOS
Yes.
um, notes and stuff like that, but there could be other digital tricks that you can put in your phone that could be helpful as well. But I think, regardless of how you do it, I think each person needs to at least have these kinds of conversations with the people in their lives, because, when COVID first happened and it was a dire, dark, scary situation, my husband and I had some uncomfortable conversations, but they were very real. Like, okay, if one of us gets sick, if something happens, we need to do this. Like we went through our outline together. We went back through our documents to make sure they were up to date and
Nice.
accurate. So the pandemic and Corona is an external situation that we're having to respond to. However, an emergency can happen anytime in your life, right? Like you could get hit, or other things can happen. And while the likelihood is low, the reality is that emergencies happen for people every day.
Right.
And so having this fundamental step one of a will and a power of attorney is so important. And then I would say for step two, the next thing to have in place is a medical directive, because if something happens to you and you're not able to act on your behalf, you want to have somebody there who can advocate for you. So, even if you're pregnant and something happens during pregnancy, or if you have surgery and something happens during surgery, you don't have the wherewithal to advocate and act for yourself. You need someone to be able to do that for you. So for a medical directive, I believe there are some differences between states. So I can't make blanket statements about all states, but I do know that you can use companies like LegalZoom, or you can hire a lawyer to help you create your own medical directive. I am not an affiliate of LegalZoom or anything like that, but when I have gone to their website, it looks like they have some different options that are really affordable and specific to your state. There may be other providers or vendors that could help as well. Personally, I hired a lawyer who's an expert in my state, and it was a few $100s, and he put it together for me, and for me as a single person. And then when I got married, we put one in place together, and that was helpful. And so again, like, just like you want to have a power of attorney, you want to have something in place for your health with a medical directive.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. Is that sometimes also called a living will, or is that separate? Is that something different?
Yeah, that can be called a living will.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I just had my first colonoscopy this year, which was like the first time in all of my adult life when I've been put under anesthesia, and that was that was one of the first things the universe did this year for me to get me to surrender.
Yeah.
It really knocked me over the head with COVID. It's like, you're not getting it. You really have to surrender here. But I do know that it's important to have those things in place. And then we spoke briefly about, as part of step two with medical directive, there's also something that you want us to have in place with our financials, with our bank accounts in particular.
Yes, so this is a big one, and it's to have a payable on death beneficiary added to your bank accounts. And so it's the shorthand of it is POD. And when you have a POD added to your bank accounts, regardless of how much money you have. So again, I would encourage you, if you have $500,000 or $3,000 or $500, it does not matter. This step is so important, because when you are no longer here and your family needs that money to be able to take care of any loose ends you may have, or for your funeral arrangements. Again, not to be morbid in any way, but like these are the realities of life, right? And having a POD means that the money would be dispensed to your loved ones instead of going to probate for the state.
Right.
And I had a friend whose mother was sick and very ill, and then passed away quickly, but also unexpectedly to some degree. And the money went to the state. And then my friend had to prove that she was the next beneficiary for that money. And it was piled up for a few months, and it was a lot of back and forth and frustration. And all of that could have been avoided with a POD on the bank accounts. So I'm going to show, I don't know if you'll be able to see this 100%. I'm going to get close. But this is an example of my own check, and I covered things up for safety. But
Right.
on the top it says POD, and then it has my husband's name underneath. And
Okay.
so that's basically an indicator to say that, yes, if something happens to Tosh Patterson, which I guess I should have blocked out my full name. But anyway, if something happens to Tosh Patterson, the money in this particular account can be dispersed to the second person who's named underneath. And this is, you know, something to have in place for yourself, regardless of your age, regardless of how much money you have. But then I think especially for older adults, you know, who are towards those golden years, right? And you want your children to be able to know that these things are taken care of.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that one, you know, is a little less scary for me, but it's also one that gets missed. You know, my dad actually reminded me of that one. So so that's a good one to have. And that one, you know, I know it's in step 2, but if you want to just get started with that one, it's easy.
Yeah, it is. It's really not that hard. And I'm imagining, because things are much more digital than they used to be. Like when we did this about 6 years ago, we had to go to the bank and we had to go through this whole process. But I would imagine it's probably a lot easier these days to be able to do it more quickly and more easily. But it's a step that's so beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good one. Um, so I think that brings us up to step 3.
Yeah, step 3, which is like pulling it all together. So, you know, we're talking about some big brushstroke things like the will and the medical directive and the power of attorney. Those are just foundational documents. But, you know, some people have additional documents that are important and don't exist anywhere else. Like if you have a yoga teacher certificate, or you have some kind of training certificate that you earned as a part of your industry or part of your credentials, and you want to keep them in one place. And so as I showed earlier, you know, we have these 2 binders, one, you know, orange for me, black for my husband. And the binders have a bunch of important documents in them. So we have all of the stuff is in here, right? And so I'm going to go through this with you to share with you what's in here. But before I do that, I want to show you, this is these are the sheets that I use. And I really like these sheets because they're thin, and they protect things. So like on the other side of here is my birth certificate, which is like really in bad shape, and then covered up my social security card. But you know, the card is so little and it's hard to find, but it's just like right here in this one sleeve.
Right.
And then I also have in this document, or in this sleeve, is my passport. And
Mhm.
then on the back, because I travel so much, I have my expedited security information back here, so that if I ever need it when I'm booking flights, it's right there. I have my will and medical directive, my yoga certificate, my marriage license, and all of the other important documents to me are in here. And then my husband has some different documents in his in his binder, but we keep them in a designated place in our home office. And so the people close to us know if something happens, come into the office, look for the binders, the orange and black binders. Just grab it for us and bring it. Or if we could say that, we could say that to someone, like, go into the office, look on the shelf, it's there. And we're pretty diligent about, like, when we come back from travel, we put our passport back in here immediately, so we know where it is and everything's grab and go. So this system actually works for me, and I really like having it compiled in one place instead of having it, because for a time I tried to have it in like a file cabinet with each folder, and that is not, to me, it's just not grab and go enough for an emergency, or for someone to be able to act on my behalf. So to your question from earlier, if I needed, someone could come to my home and just grab this and do what they needed to do. And they would see in here, if they look at my medical directive, no, I don't want a blood transfusion. No, I don't want, it's like very specific about what I do and don't want during pregnancy, during surgery, generally speaking. And so it really takes the burden off the other person from having to decide for you, because I've outlined it all. So you don't have to think about it. You just follow my instructions.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's really like the whole system of thinking about emergency preparedness as self-care. So yes, I know it's not sexy, but it is such like a fundamental piece that I think is overlooked, and that, given the context of the times that we're living in, needs to be a priority. So since you're home and there's not a lot to do, you could order a binder from Amazon, you could order the sleeves from Amazon, and then you could think about, well, what are the documents that I would want to put in my binder? And then you could also consider, if you have children, like each of your children could have their own binder that has the important documents for each one of them, right? So this could be a really quick and easy way to get organized.
Yeah, and like you said, now is a good time to have all of this stuff in place, and also a good time to be putting it in place. But as you also said, the fires in California where your house is burning and you have to grab something fast, and or an earthquake, or flooding, who knows. But I love the idea of having it all in one place, because I have it all in one place, but it's all one filing cabinet, like you said. So putting it all into a grabbable binder is probably a much better idea.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I say, if anyone puts it together, snap a picture and tag us so we can see what you did, or even how you modified it, or if there are other ways to be able to, to organize this, because I do think it's just so important. I can't emphasize that enough. But, I think that as we change and things evolve and become more digital, there may be other ways to do this that I haven't even thought of. So I'd love to see what people put together, if it's this format that I've shared or something else.
I appreciate that. So we've looked at, the fact that these are important pieces to have, and I'm still feeling a little bit of trepidation around them. I know you mentioned LegalZoom as a way of doing the medical directive. Is that also a possibility for getting started with a will, or do I really need to contact a lawyer to get started with that?
I think it could be a quick and easy way to get started, but I think personally, I like the idea of having access to a lawyer who can answer my questions. And there are lawyers in every state that specialize in this type of work. Yeah, I personally started off using a lawyer that was referred to me by a friend, and I found it really, really helpful, because he was able to answer my specific questions and talk to me about, okay, well, because I had several things in play, like my husband and I weren't married, but we were about to purchase a home, and then my husband's parents had just passed, and he was about to sell a home. So, the lawyer was able to answer some very specific questions for us, and we found it really helpful. So if you're going to Google this and you're looking for a lawyer in your area, just Google estate lawyer or estate planning in my area. They don't call it emergency preparedness. That's just my lens for it. But I would say a lawyer would be great because they can be more specific. I believe LegalZoom is just like a quick kind of template starting point. But again, I'm not an affiliate of them. I've never used them. I have friends who have used them and had good experiences. So my knowledge on them is very limited.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much, Tosh. Is there anything else that you want to say to kick us a little bit in the rear end and make sure that we're on this?
Yeah, I just want to encourage people to make it a priority and don't be scared of it. It is not scary. You're actually doing your loved ones a favor by taking the time to really think about these things and have them in place so that they can have their space to either take care of you if that's what's necessary, or to grieve and do whatever needs to be done in that moment. So, just push yourself a little bit and just adult, right? A hashtag adulting. Just get it done, check it off the list, and then you'll have peace of mind knowing that it's taken care of. Like, stop putting it off. And don't let this whole excuse of, I don't have any money, I don't have anything to leave people. Don't let that be a false thing that stops you. Regardless of how much or how little money you have, you need these things, and they do absolutely matter. So push yourself to that edge and get it done. Get it done.
And I love that you brought it around to the sense of relief that you'll feel when you have this in place. Because one of the first things that happens, when COVID hit was, I'm worried about, well, what kind of mess am I leaving my husband? So this would be a nice thing to have in place so that I know that even though there might still be a mess, there will be some, we will have thought about it some before, he's just presented with it. So.
Yeah. And the other side of it too, like maybe you have most of these things in place and you just haven't looked at them for a while. So revisit them. Is it still accurate? Because when COVID first started and my husband and I looked at our stuff again, we were like, oh, some of these things are outdated. We need to update them. Like we sold our last house. We downsized into a smaller house. These addresses need to be updated. So that kind of stuff is so important. But then the other layer of it too is if you have loved ones, so you have parents or sisters or brothers or people who are close to you, if something happened to them, where's their important stuff? Like I called my parents and I was like, hey, where are you guys keeping your important stuff now? And I asked my younger sisters, because they live with my parents, hey, do you know where their stuff is? Like if something happens, have you guys had that conversation? And so me asking the question then prompted my mom to tell all of us, yeah, this is here, these things are in place. And I was like, oh, okay, great. But it's good to know. So, you may need to do it for yourself, but you also want to do it to those around you who you love and care about.
Absolutely. And I was smiling because the hashtag adulting keeps running through my head. So I will find a way to incorporate that into our note here.
Yes, so important. And thank you so much for having me on, Kristine. It's a pleasure to be here and have these conversations. And, this is just another example of prioritizing yourself and not letting fear get in the way, or not allowing yourself to be overwhelmed by, I don't know what to do. Like really follow these 3 steps, figure it out, and start, take the first steps.
Yes, and I appreciate what you said about overwhelm. What I'm learning about overwhelm is that it really is just fear in another disguise. And the best way to make it disappear is to look straight at it. The thing that you're overwhelmed about, you actually know what you need to do. You just don't want to look at it. So when you look at it and when you take just 15 minutes to get really clear about the thing that's overwhelming you, you'll see that you know a lot more than you do, and that it's really not as scary as it might appear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Tosh, and we will have you back next month, and we'll have a new surprise.
Love it.
All right, thank you so much. If anyone has questions, please leave them here in the comments, and I'll make sure that Tosh sees them. And if we can't address them, maybe we can send you in a direction where someone may be able to help. But until then, I appreciate you taking the time to watch today, and I am wishing you wonder. Be well. Bye-bye.